Philomela, Voice to the Voiceless. Chapter 6, The Lovers. In the fall of 2020, I went to meet a man who'd been living in the woods. We started talking online, and I liked his depth and sensitivity. He'd hiked 1,000 miles of the Appalachian Trail in less than 4 months. He was from the Northeast. He was staying temporarily in a mountain tourist town near the city where I lived in the South. He was doing some work for a woman who owned a hostel he'd stayed at, building stone steps for her at a house. I agreed to drive to that town and hang out with him. Once I decided that I didn't think he'd kill me, we went for a walk in the national park he'd recently ventured out of, which wasn't far away. As we strolled along the trail, I began to get a sense of my companion's thoughtful nature. He listened, and he chose his words carefully. He had an even keel, a serene demeanor. We went for a swim in a clear, cool stream, and we held hands and then kissed, standing in the pristine water. As I took in our surroundings, the stupendous wilderness around us, the emerald green of the trees and the wispy clouds peeking through them, I felt delightfully far away from civilization. I imagined us as being in a primordial forest. There was no one else around. It was easy to pretend that we were the only two people in the world. I didn't mind the feeling. Asclepius had gone on his journey to heal after a major surgery. The hiking had made him strong. I wound up bringing him back to society with me. When I introduced him to my friend Penthesilea, she said that he seemed like someone who knew a lot about snakes, and he started telling her all about snakes, earning him the nickname Snake Man. When I was in graduate school, I took a class on the history of the English language. We were assigned a word report. I was to investigate a single word, trace it back to its origins, and analyze how the meaning of that word may have changed over time. Out of all the words in the English language, I picked the word serpent, having a curiosity about whether it was cognate with herpo from ancient Greek, meaning to creep or crawl, the root from which we get both herpetology and herpes. I wondered if the words serpent and herpo might both go back to an older Indo-European root. I found that they did. I also found that the connotations of the word serpent had shifted dramatically over the centuries. Snakes used to be a positive symbol, one of regeneration, rebirth. Snakes shed their skins and start anew, after all. Temples for the ancient figure of Asclepius, the god of medicine, were full of non-venomous snakes who roamed at will as healers performed their rituals. Suppliants often slept in the temples, among the snakes, and hoped for dreams that would reveal how they could be made well. The staff of Asclepius, observable today on ambulances, has a snake on it. Snakes were even associated with Christ for a while. But eventually the serpent of the Bible, and the wily sneakiness thereof, took over as the predominant association. In the lover's card, there is a snake, the good old serpent of the Bible. The imagery is decidedly biblical, with an angel towering over Adam and Eve. One tree, around which the snake is coiled, has apples, and the other appears to have flames, perhaps representing the fire of knowledge, or of hell. There is a mountain in the background, much like the ones my Asclepius climbed. I later climbed a mountain with Asclepius, trudged over 20 miles of hilly backcountry terrain with him. What if, in those moments, as if in our own personal Eden, the voice of the Lord came booming from the sky and told us not to eat honeysuckle. Would we deserve to be ordered out of the woods forever if I slipped up and put a drop of nectar on my tongue? When I met Asclepius, I, like he, was in need of healing. I'd been through several rough breakups in quick succession, and while I liked him, I had reached a point where I could not even fathom really trusting a man. I wasn't able to commit. I was open to a fling, but anything beyond that I balked at. Asclepius was emotionally available, ready to be with me, be there for me, but I couldn't receive his love and loyalty. When he gave me sweetness and devotion, it frightened me. I kept waiting for him to reveal his slimy self, to bite me. We went on a 3,000-mile road trip to Colorado together. Asclepius was patient with and kind to my animals and me. The worst thing that ever happened was that we had a disagreement and raised our voices at each other one night in my car. In retrospect, I was probably the one who got loud first. I had PMS from hell and had been going through a nerve-wracking time with my parents, and I had a short fuse and likely a shrill tone. Even when he did lose his temper that night, he did not intimidate me, hurt me, call me names, go nuts. We just had an argument. People can argue and work things out, but I had strict policies at the time. I wanted to be single. I hadn't had any time to myself in too long. It didn't help Asclepius's cause that my friend Cleopatra hated him. She would put him down, call him homeless, a loser. Asclepius had other options. He could have headed home to his family and friends, returned to the trail, done whatever he felt like. He was choosing to spend his time with me. In many ways, he bettered my life. But the thought got in my head that maybe he was using me, biding his time, and bad for me. When we got back from our cross-country trek, I told him that I wanted him to go. I wanted to live alone, to not be bothered, to not be accountable to anyone. Asclepius would talk about an us, about being on a team together, and the thought terrified me. Every time I had let a man into my life, I had wound up in a weakened position, drained physically, emotionally, spiritually, financially, or all of the above. I wanted everything to be up to me for once, to not be affected in any way by another person. When I asked Asclepius to leave, he went. I said no, in the sense of not having it in me to be in a relationship, and he listened. I wouldn't know this until later, but he didn't take a bus home like I thought. He went back to the woods, in the dead of winter, and hiked until the springtime. In the meantime, I got what I wanted, the silence and solitude I had been craving. I started working on my book, started seeking my own fulfillment. I also fell back in with a horrible ex, who got me off track for about a month. What I went through with Narcissus gave me a surprising new appreciation for Asclepius. I started to miss my snake man. It would rise up in my throat sometimes like a wail, a feeling of longing for him. It all began revealing itself in hindsight, how he had been a good man. I realized that I had felt safe with him, that he'd made me laugh and made me think, that he'd motivated me to get out of my comfort zone. He pushed me to accomplish more than I thought I could, such as when we visited Turquoise Lake at an elevation of over 11,000 feet. But he was also mindful of my feelings, cared about what I said, fussed over and spoiled me in certain ways, wouldn't ever force me to do something I refused to do. Unlike Narcissus, I evicted Narcissus from my life, having to get a restraining order, and I remember thinking that I wished I'd just been with Asclepius instead. He never would have done such things to me. I'd recall how untouchable I'd felt in his arms. I finally was by myself, finally had the quiet I'd been desperate for. And I did like it. I did enjoy having room to breathe more freely, to only have to worry about myself, to do my own thing with no one's eyes on me. But as more time went on, I wondered if I'd been too drastic, too hasty, too extreme. I didn't feel Asclepius would want to hear from me, though. I thought of all the qualities he'd had that could be rare in people, traits that are important to me. In my 20s, my AA sponsor had me make a list of my ideals, what I was looking for in a significant other. It was a long, detailed, specific list. It wasn't until after Asclepius had left that I thought about that list and realized that I could check every box on it with him. He was sensitive, not just to his own feelings, but to the feelings of others. That was a key one. So often I've found that men who are in touch with their emotions and able to feel them only seem to be cognizant of their own pain. They can cry oceans over their paper cut while taking someone's arm off with a machete and not batting an eye, not even noticing the gushing blood, oblivious, searching for a band-aid for their finger. I was content to be alone, knew that I would find peace and satisfaction on my own. It was disconcerting to me, though, when sorrow about Asclepius would fill my head. I tried not to let myself dwell on these doubts about whether I'd made the right call. I began to suspect that sending him away for good might have been a mistake. What if I could have had it all, could have been my own person, but also been with my love? It seemed like a moot point, though, because he was long gone, and we'd exchanged some raw text messages at the end, hadn't left things on the best of terms. At the time, I thought he was being an asshole, but eventually I saw that he'd kept his cool fairly well, considering that I'd broken his heart and kicked him out just after Christmas. No, I thought, I'd likely burned that bridge, so I should just put it out of my mind. I would think of Asclepius at random times, wonder how he was. I didn't know that he'd shuttled down to Georgia and started walking north, back toward me, that he was still on the Appalachian Trail. I started to heal some deep wounds, speaking trauma out of my body by writing some of my worst tales and reading them aloud. A strange but therapeutic process seemed to help significantly. It was almost as if the energy of those experiences, stored in my cells for so long, was leaving me. I faced the biggest, baddest boogeymen: Jupiter, Mars, Turnus, Augustus, and it occurred to me that I had not given Asclepius a fair chance at all. How could I have? I was expecting him to prove to be just as dark and dangerous as other men who'd harmed me. He'd said as much one day, suggested that I was assuming he would be like men from my past had been, and it infuriated me. How dare he try to psychoanalyze me? I was doing just fine, thanks. The problem was that all men were pigs, except I liked pigs more, and I wanted to go and be a strong feminist who needed a man like a fish needed a bicycle. In reality, I was scared of getting hurt again. Having been violated, beaten, lied to, cheated on, and gaslit until I didn't know what was up or down, the idea of there being a man in my life in any way where I might be made vulnerable again was just too much. It made me feel on the verge of a panic attack. After Asclepius had gone, Narcissus came back into the picture and made all those fears come true. He wanted me to call him Daddy, wanted to hit me, wouldn't take no for an answer, was pathological around sex and power, was dishonest, and tried to destroy my self-esteem and sense of reality. When I had to face him in court, and I was believed, when other women he'd victimized came forward to support me, something in me shifted. Narcissus brought all of my trauma around men to the surface, like a big oozing pimple that finally burst. When I was heard, when even a white male judge in the South listened to my story and did the right thing, granted me an order of protection for a year, and said that I had made serious claims and he was inclined to believe them. When I cried after that hearing, which women I didn't even know had raised money for me to have a lawyer at, it left me so much of the terror. This is not to say that I trust the justice system. There are police officers who make people fear and distrust cops as a whole, with good reason. But I had never involved the law before. If I ever needed to again, I could and would. I hope I don't have to, and one way to see to that might be avoiding all men. Even then, though, one might break into my bedroom like Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, and necessitate calling the authorities if I lived. There is no possible way to live without some risk of being scarred by a man again. But what did I risk losing if I became such a loner that I swore off any and all lovers? The contrast between just how bad it got with Narcissus and just how good I'd had it with Asclepius was stark. I had seen Asclepius as a threat, but not recognized the real and present danger of Narcissus. I knew on an intuitive level that Asclepius would not have done me violence in any of those ways. I would lie in the middle of my queen-sized bed and wish I had handled things differently. I resigned myself to a spinster life. I even welcomed it. But as much as I did like the thought of seizing the reins of my own life, mightn't it be better to share my days with someone? To have my dear love in the seat next to me? I started to question if I had been confused about what I really wanted. Was it singlehood? A solo life? Or did I want a partner, but maybe feel that I didn't deserve a good partner, or that such a thing didn't exist, at least not a male one? There is a song called February by Dar Williams that I listened to on repeat at times during the month of February, which I spent alone. I had a solid 6 weeks or so to myself after Narcissus. The lyrics of the song mentioned forgetting what a flower was, forgetting you'd planted bulbs, losing to winter. I would think of Asclepius when I played the song, wishing the ice and snow of my coldness hadn't frozen the seedling of our love. I wished that it could have survived to see spring. Early in March, I lit 2 white candles on my altar. I wanted to call in whatever would serve my highest good. The purpose of this particular spell was to sow the seeds of my new moon intentions, put energy behind them. I was focused on bringing positive vibes for the book chapter I was working on and my tiny home project, not thinking of a man. In fact, there was a noticeable absence of any man in my life. I had just ended a 15-year friendship with Julius Caesar, who had done something so disrespectful to me that it was the last straw. He was blocked on my phone and social media. It takes a lot for me to block someone. I hate to do it and only resort to it when I feel I absolutely must to protect myself. I had no romantic prospects on the horizon or in my periphery. I was startled then when I read in my day planner, one based around the moon and astrology, that romance was in the air with this new moon in Pisces. I underlined it and wrote an exclamation point and a question mark above the sentence. I don't put too much stock in astrology, but I do enjoy reading and thinking about it. The candles kept burning. I wasn't sure if I were pleased or saddened by the dearth of eligible bachelors in my world. I hadn't been looking for anyone. Julius Caesar, who'd said he wanted me many times over the years, but always changed his mind at the last minute, had made me feel even more sickened by males than I already was, an impressive feat. I was pondering whether I should realistically just give up on dating, or start dating women in earnest, not sure what the answer was. There were perks to being a bachelorette. I could eat Chex Mix in bed at 3 in the morning, and no one would be there to judge me. But when I woke up from a nightmare, there would be no one to comfort me either. That made me think of Asclepius, how he was the only man I'd ever been with who truly got how to handle my nightmares. He knew how to stay calm and gently pull me back into the room, how to talk to me in a soothing, reassuring voice, and slowly, cautiously work up to touching me until I crumpled into his hug. Once his arms locked around me and I could let my body relax into his soft strength, feeling protected, I would come back to my senses. Other men had gotten angry, done everything wrong, tried to grab me, yelled at me, thrown things. Asclepius intuitively understood, likely because he had his own traumas, how to put a person with PTSD at ease. Asclepius was tough, could fight if he needed to, but preferred peace. He felt passionately about it being wrong to hit women. I never felt as if he would be dangerous to me personally. He was the type who would defend people who were being bullied. He told me a story about putting a neighbor guy who was beating his girlfriend in his place, and another about standing up to jerks in jail who were keeping elderly inmates from eating their Thanksgiving meals, stealing their trays. In 2020, Asclepius spent a different Thanksgiving with me and my parents, Juno, and my stepdad Saturn. I would recall how patient he'd been with them, how he pitched in and helped with the cooking, how he made the cranberry sauce with freshly zested orange, how willing he was to meet me where I was and be present. There were times during that challenging visit with my parents when it seemed Asclepius was the only person on my side, the only one of the three who had my best interest at heart. But I wasn't in a place where I could trust anyone. Even though I had run to Asclepius's arms after having a back molar pulled, an awful experience, and had been so grateful he was there for me to melt into, I wanted to be self-sufficient. I wanted to not need anyone to hold me. I wanted to hold my own. But oh, how I missed those arms. It wasn't just that I wanted someone to take care of me. I consciously chose solitude, and I liked it well enough. I could honestly be pretty goddamn content with my books and my cats. For someone to garner my interest, they would have to make my life markedly better. Was my life better with Asclepius in it, I wondered. I thought maybe it had been. I'd looked at his Facebook profile that day I lit the candles, and a few days before. Had been thinking of him. I didn't reach out, though, because I assumed he hated me. I looked back through some of our pictures. I'd loved watching him take photographs in the woods. He'd stoop down to zoom in on a plant and agonize over bringing it into focus, wanting to capture all the close-up details. I liked the way he gave things his full attention. I missed his quiet, observant presence, how he loved taking in the outdoors. I was disappointed in myself for taking him for granted. I wrote my intentions for the new moon, and my planner posed the question, what's my most romantic dream for my future? I put, a life where I can be myself and share my days with someone I know wants to be there, feel supported, but have space. Was that possible? I questioned even as I wrote it. And had I been mistaken about Asclepius? Did we have that until I threw it away? As my candles burned, as my intentions germinated, I got a message from Asclepius. It came out of the blue. We hadn't spoken in months. I was so happy to hear from him. I couldn't believe it. Was I going to get a second chance after realizing what I'd lost? He missed me, he said. I told him the same. Tears and words flowed out of me in a monsoon. He explained that he'd gone back out on the trail, even with the winter weather, and made his way to North Carolina. He sent me pictures of what he'd been up to, and some of the sights were breathtaking. It hit me like the proverbial ton of bricks. Asclepius was a survivor, resilient. He could have gone anywhere, and did, went out in the elements, kept moving. He hadn't been staying with me in the fall because he had nowhere else to go. He'd been there because he wanted to be with me. And now, when he could still be anywhere, doing anything, as the world was thawing, he was talking to me. I hadn't thought highly enough of myself before to believe that it was his caring about me that kept him around, that he wasn't just using me somehow. I smiled and smiled to myself as we texted. I knew that I would know, from then on, that it was not a matter of convenience, his choosing me. It was what we both wanted. We had our time apart, and then each of us still felt pulled to the other, as we came to terms with what we'd had, and how much it really did mean to us. We stayed up until dawn talking, no pauses or delays, just back and forth pouring our hearts out. We apologized for things we could have done better, resolved all that we needed to. During our conversation, we both mentioned regrets we'd had, and the remorse we expressed was earnest, I felt. Asclepius didn't shy away from or downplay any mistakes on his part. He owned them. Likewise, I tried to take responsibility for my own screw-ups. After some space, time, and reflection, I could see that I'd never really given Asclepius an opportunity for me to love him, hadn't ever let him in, had kept him at arm's length because I was petrified of being disappointed. It seemed we wanted to try again, applying the insights we'd gained during our time apart. He talked about how he just wanted to hold me. I wanted that too. I wanted to see what it would be like to try with an open heart, which I hadn't had the first time. We made plans for me to come and get him the next day. When we got back to my apartment, after I picked him up from North Carolina, I couldn't help but notice how different things felt this time around. I didn't have a wall up, and I felt like I could see him clearly, maybe for the first time. He was not the caricature Cleopatra had tried to make him into. He was handsome, gentle, a nice guy, not seeking to do anything negative to me, just trying to know and love me. He seemed to pick up on the changes as well. I wasn't closed off, was actually ready to commit, could be there with him, and not have a million thoughts about the past or future running through my head. The connectedness I felt when we made love blew my mind. How much more ardent he was, how my making him feel more wanted and secure seemed to have made him more inclined to let go and express affection physically. We'd had good chemistry before, but it was nothing like this, because love had had enough time and space to sprout and start growing. Love has so little to do with lust, I am just beginning to understand. I feel lust for Asclepius, sure, but neither of us could really let go and enjoy ourselves until we knew we were loved, not just lusted. Asclepius said to me once that he had anxiety about whether or not I wanted to be with him, and it made it difficult for him to feel sexual. For him, free flow of sexuality came with love, and love came with feeling secure. The best of our time together has come since I put my heart into the equation more. I didn't know how to love him back then. I looked at him with suspicion and was reticent. Couldn't bring myself to go out on another limb and come crashing down again. He met me when I was weary to my bones, soul weary, and kind of hated all men just for being men, because so many of their kind had done so many fucked up things to me. He was guilty until proven innocent, but I didn't even let him present his case. Wasn't open to considering the possibility that he could be harmless, a garter snake, not a king cobra. One of my favorite memories of Asclepius is from our trip to Colorado. We'd just arrived in Denver and were 5 minutes from the first dispensary we were going to check out, when my big goofy giant of a boy cat, Hodor, who'd been riding in Asclepius's lap, had an accident and peed on him. Asclepius was so good-natured about it. We got him cleaned up, he changed in the back of the van, and then we went inside the dispensary to make our purchases. When we came back out, Hodor was sprawled across the dashboard, just lounging. We got a funny picture of him with the neon green sign for the dispensary in the background, and laughed at his antics, as did the stoner guy in the car next to us, who could see Hodor prancing around. Asclepius could have been irritable, complained about Hodor, acted like a jackass, but he rolled with it. He and Hodor became closer than ever, and still have a special relationship. Hodor adores Asclepius, does happy dances and headbutts him, sleeps next to him every night. If there isn't room on the bed, Hodor curls up on the floor beside him. My ex-husband Bacchus hated Hodor, wanted me to get rid of him. Asclepius has been nothing but accepting of my menagerie, seems to like being part of it. A guy who's down with a woman who has 5 cats and a dog might be a bit of a unicorn just for that reason. But it wasn't about finding someone who would put up with me. He has not made me feel like someone who has to be put up with, for one thing. He has made me feel appreciated. It wasn't Bobby McGee who was the love of my life. He was the theoretical greatest love. But Asclepius is the greatest real love. He is the love that withstood all the tests. Could we resolve conflict? Could I trust him to be there through thick and thin? And could I look to him for all the qualities I deemed essential in a partner? Bobby McGee was a what if. Asclepius is a what is. He just is what I have wanted and needed. He is sleeping upstairs. In the morning, he'll make coffee, and then we'll see where to go from there. My days are improved by my companion, my love. Last week he told me that he wanted to help me with my tiny home dream, put his resources toward it, but have it be mine, no matter what. That kind of love, love given freely, love that can hold on loosely, but also let you know it's there. Love that wants you to be joyful, not feel suffocated, is the love I want to emulate. Asclepius is his own person, an independent thinker. Cleopatra made fun of him for believing Bigfoot might be real, as if he were insane. She tried to convince me that he had schizophrenia. Incidentally, she just made a social media post stating the same about me. Hopefully his and my many personalities will live happily ever after. Neither of us has ever been diagnosed with schizophrenia. When I looked back on it, I honestly didn't care what Asclepius thought about Bigfoot. I didn't mind his stance on Sasquatches one iota. It was endearing, even. If that was the worst thing about him, that he was fascinated by mysterious disappearances and had dreams of joining search and rescue teams to help find missing people. Oh, and we once had an argument. I felt like I could deal with that. Asclepius is not perfect. Neither am I. Other occasions in my life, I've tried to convince myself that the douchebag in front of me was Prince Charming, build up a fantasy of how flawless he was, all while his deep, dark, dangerous deficiencies lined up to bite me in the ass. Asclepius never presented himself as some ideal man. He was just himself. I was heartened to discover that he was still who he'd originally presented himself as. He hadn't changed on a fundamental level, was the same person I'd met in the woods in the fall. I hitchhiked for the first time with Asclepius. I was having a hard time on our long hike in the mountains, and didn't want to walk the 15 miles back to my van, so we walked 5 instead to the nearest road and thumbed a ride. At the time, I resented him for it, as if he'd put me in jeopardy. But I was the one who had said I wanted to do a challenging route. I was up for it, and then wouldn't attempt the full distance. He was patient and flexible with me on that trip. He never made me feel bad for needing to stop frequently, or not being as hardcore as he was on ascents. How many times did he fill up the water filter and make sure that I stayed hydrated? When I melted down from fear in the dark, he wrapped me up in his arms and kept the evil clowns I was picturing outside the shelter at bay. I was too foolish to see the devotion in front of me. He wasn't why I got scared that night. I got scared because I'd never slept out in the open in the deep woods like that before. But I'd wanted to do it. Asclepius brought me pocketfuls of white quartz from his travels. Now, as when we first dated, he is thinking of me, of us, does small things to make me feel appreciated, to make me smile. I winced to think of all the fault I'd found with him before, the microscope I'd put him under. I was just waiting for him to slip up and show that he was a meathead, reveal his true colors. Surely he had to be a dirtball. Every other man had been. But he's not. He's just not. He's quick to jump up and get me a drink, or take the dog out so I don't have to go, or rub my shoulders if I'm tense. When I wake up and find that he already loaded and ran the dishwasher, or when he does any number of praiseworthy things, I feel loved. I don't just want someone to perform acts of service for me, though. It isn't about benefits used as emotional currency. I appreciate the spirit in which he does these things, because he wants to, because he has a desire to make my life better, to better my circumstances. This makes me want to behave similarly, to be thoughtful, not because I feel obligated or like it is tit for tat, but because I care about him. I want someone I want to perform acts of service for, too, just spontaneously, someone whose happiness brings me happiness. I find myself more conscious of his feelings, but also my own. There is room to love myself and another, I am finding. For many years, I kept picking men who sought to dominate me. Even when I chose Paris, who later came to fully identify as a woman, and thought I was breaking the mold, he turned out to have much violence and toxic masculinity in him. He was the first romantic partner who hit me. Paris, Orpheus, Augustus, the Minotaur, Bacchus, Loki, and Narcissus all did me physical harm. Bacchus nearly paralyzed my left side, which I could barely move for a month without shooting pains from neck to ankle. I do not know why I continued to fall for men who were abusive, but that is on the men who abused me that they went that route. I was so afraid that Asclepius would be another of these fiends that I booted him from my garden prematurely. Even the best intentioned of us can become like the God of the Bible if we are not careful. Asclepius has never done me violence. He has never even made me fear the threat of it. Setting the bar to "he doesn't beat me" would be low indeed, but it is more than that. We are similar people. Our days together are calm. We laugh often. We have talks both deep and irreverent. He makes me think, and I like to think it is the same for him. In spite of our different backgrounds, I grew up in the rural South, while he is from the urban Northeast. We have worldviews that line up. We despise racists and Trump. I may not relate to all the specifics of his life story, but we have numerous parallels. I do feel that he understands me. As more time passes, I come to understand him more and respect him. Mutual respect is essential. If someone mistreats you, demands that you be their subordinate, then yes, autonomy is better. But if there were someone who met my standards, who genuinely enriched my life, and I sent him away forever because I was so scared to love, that would be a travesty. He needed to prove some things to me before I could invite him into my life more fully, but he has. Good men are hard to find. I know this all too well. Cleopatra turned on me because she didn't like that I was getting back with Asclepius. She somehow got things twisted around somewhere, and she seemed to think that she was in charge of my life. She ignored me for a couple weeks, when we usually chatted every day, and then I tried to talk to her about how it felt to be met with rejection for not doing what she thought was best. She told me that we were in different places in our lives, and she probably needed to have more friends who were moms. When I called her on it being a little insensitive to make me feel unworthy of her friendship because I can't have biological children, she blocked me. It felt like she stabbed me in the chest. She knew I was writing a book about being silenced. I am beginning to question how healthy our friendship ever was for me. There could be only one queen in that relationship, and it had to be her. This happened while I was finishing the Hierophant chapter. Had there been another Hierophant in my midst, I needed to smoke out. A few weeks before Asclepius returned, I'd been telling another friend, the Magdalena, that I felt as if Cleopatra and I were growing apart. When I was seeing Narcissus in January, Cleopatra refused to read any of my messages to make a point. She left them unread for a month. She contacted me again when she surmised from my Facebook post that he and I had stopped seeing each other. She said as much. She made light of her absence, acted as if it hadn't been intentional, but I felt certain that she was lying, that she had consciously tried to punish me by withholding any sort of communication. Considering how Cleopatra in history supposedly died by snake, I suppose it makes sense that my Cleopatra was not a fan of Snake Man. But what had he ever done to her? She'd never even met him. Yet, like the angel in the garden, she was ready to cast both of us out. Because she would rather I listen to her, would rather I stay single. She claimed in her last messages that when I got with a guy, she didn't think I made our friendship as much of a priority. Yet she could have a boyfriend. She could talk about him. I always made a point of keeping in touch with her and giving her much of my attention, even when I was with someone. Her defense for her actions rang hollow, and her messages seemed fake. When the death blow of our 15-year friendship came, it felt like it was time. Maybe she had been that ruthless all along. I was so relieved to see Asclepius in one piece, thankful that nothing had happened to him. When our relationship had ended before, Cleopatra had been especially hard on him, saying that I should just kick him out in the snow, should do it nastily, just get up and start screaming at him to get the fuck out now. Even my mother said it was mean, the way Cleopatra was talking about how I should treat him, as if he were a second-class citizen, not even a human being. When I wrapped my arms around Asclepius, I did not feel any nastiness, just the sweet, steady care that had been there all along. It makes me angry at myself to think that I let Cleopatra poison my mind against him. Maybe I never would have sent him away if she hadn't gotten me all worked up with her urgent, alarming messages about how badly I needed to get rid of him. I shared some of my fears, yes, such as what if you were a parasite, but she would pour gasoline on the fires and magnify every worst-case scenario I was worried about until they were all fact, all looming larger than life, all about to burn me alive. He probably was dangerous, according to her. He probably would stab me in my sleep. Part of being a strong, independent woman is doing whatever the fuck I want. I declared singlehood, claimed that as my destiny, and then thought better of it. My mother and Cleopatra are not single. They are both in long-term relationships. Why would they insist that I be single as a prerequisite of treating me with respect? That is about control, not love. I am so over women mistreating other women in the same ways men do. We could support and lift each other up, but instead ego gets in the way. I'm tired of giving unconditional love and being met with those who would seek to disempower me. When the angel was complicit in kicking Adam and Eve out of the garden, it was choosing the position of might makes right. Asclepius has not bullied me. My mother has, and I am questioning Cleopatra's motives. When I was 21, Cleopatra seduced me in the living room of the apartment we shared. We were stoned, lying on the floor, giggling, and then out of nowhere she kissed me and went down on me. I reciprocated. I knew that she didn't want to be with me. She wasn't trying to initiate dating. It was about the physical gratification. She was with a guy. I felt used. It made me hesitant about her, but I wrote it off, thinking that she was young and exploring her sexual identity. When I was 23, she was encouraging me to break up with my partner Paris. I'd lived with Paris for 2 years. In an evening, she'd decided that I should have him leave, and she should move in with me again. She wanted me to dismantle my stoner room, my favorite place in the home, and make that her bedroom. Things with Paris had been hard. He wanted to wear women's clothing, was considering the possibility that he was transgendered, and I wasn't sure what to make of it all. We did end up breaking up, at least in part because Cleopatra got me in a tizzy, made me feel frantic, and like I had to do it right then. The night I called it off with Paris, he went to a friend's house, and Cleopatra stayed over. I made up the couch for her, but she came and got in bed with me, kissed me, and initiated sex. The next morning, I felt shaken. Had she used sex to manipulate me? I didn't want to live with her again. She'd done some concerning things when we were roommates before. She was going through a divorce and needed a place to stay. Was she homeless sexual, as she later accused Asclepius of being? Did she think if she slept with me, I'd feel beholden to have her move in with me? I made her leave. I got back with Paris. And then I took everything she said with a grain of salt. I knew from other things she shared with me that she had a scheming, self-serving side. She'd talk openly about playing men, getting them to give her money and favors. It was Cleopatra who'd introduced me to Hector, he of the sacred shroom sex. He was the only one of my boyfriends she ever liked, though she vacillated with demeaning him as well, and he was ultimately among the worst. She also introduced me to what we called gas station ecstasy, packets of incense enhancer that you could get at this one store in a rough neighborhood. She wasn't the best influence. After I moved to New York, I put up a wall with Cleopatra as well as Hector. I found her flaky and shady. We reconnected after I moved back to the South. I still felt like she made everything about her and looked at people with an eye to what they could do for her. She was the queen. I was to be part of her entourage, but I was not to presume to be on her level. She got pregnant. We started talking more. I hoped the child might help her mature, change her for the better, get her to think about someone else. I rubbed her feet with lotion when she was 8 months old to try to help with the aching and swelling, and spent a good deal of money on gifts for her baby shower. I wanted to start over, to give an older, hopefully wiser Cleopatra a second chance. When her daughter was about 8 months old, we were having a slumber party at our friend Cassandra's house. Once Cleopatra and I were the only ones awake, she opened up to me. She wasn't sure if the baby was her boyfriend's. He'd had to go to the hospital for emergency brain surgery, and while he was being operated on, she cheated on him with a hippie in the woods. Cleopatra hadn't told anyone, and the guilt was eating her up. I recommended total honesty. I was sober then, in AA, and big on spiritual principles. She wound up taking my advice and coming clean with him. In the short term, it did not go well. He wanted paternity testing, and he was not the father. They broke up. Sometime later, they reconciled. Her guy forgave her and treated her daughter like his own. They went on to have 2 more children of their own. I was glad that they'd been able to get past it, and wished Cleopatra and her family well, but it never quite left my mind. If she could do that, be unfaithful, while her love of several years was undergoing brain surgery, What other betrayals might she be capable of? I didn't want to judge Cleopatra. I knew grief could come out sideways in socially objectionable ways, but I sensed something damaged and dishonest in her. She seemed to take everything working out for her, the happy ending of her getting back with the guy and having his babies, as a sign that she could do no wrong. More and more she became full of herself as the perfect mom with the perfect relationship. She'd give me advice that sounded like something out of a 1950s manual on how to be the perfect housewife. Was I to bring his pipe and slippers, too? Fetch them like a dog? She told me about how this boyfriend cheated on her while she was pregnant to get back at her, but then they were even. I would not have wanted what they had, yet she knew everything. I saw Cleopatra almost like a little sister. She had had a rough childhood, and was not the most educated. She had a very high opinion of her intelligence, but I would be struck by how ignorant some of the things she said were. But I was attached to her, had a soft spot for her. We'd lived together when we were such babies, had been broken girls just out of our teens, and it had felt at times as if we only had each other. I felt I could overlook her moral failings. When you have friends whose character isn't trustworthy, it can erode your sense of self. Cleopatra toyed with me, I see now, often trying to run the show of my life with pushy advice. I tried telling her that I wasn't asking for advice. I never was. I didn't want anyone to tell me what to do. I was just talking about what was going on with me. Cleopatra always had an opinion, though, and she didn't hold back. She would universally push me to leave my boyfriends, find justifications for saying awful things about them. Some of them deserved this treatment, but she would without exception leave me riddled with doubts, turn the men I was seeing into jokes. One was a slob, a man-child, a loser. Another was crazy, stupid, and ugly. Cleopatra sowed discord in every relationship I had. Asclepius seemed to bother her the most of all. She spent the months we dated the first time around talking shit about him constantly. Now, sometimes I would vent. There were conversations where I was down on him too, where I would share things that were wearing on me. She always thought I needed to excise him from my life. Even when I was happy, she would make fun of him. He could do nothing right. She would call him names and lambaste him, whether I said negative or positive things. I broke up with him in Colorado, then second-guessed it after he left for the bus station. Cleopatra was angry with me for being tempted to get back with him. I did get back with him, went and picked him up from downtown before he bought a ticket. She acted like she couldn't believe it, like I was such an idiot. It mattered to her not at all that I had been happy to see him again then, too. I do have a poor track record with men. I can see how any friend of mine could get exasperated and want to shout, "Just be single, for crying out loud! Just for half a year, even!" But Asclepius wasn't abusing me. He hadn't hit me, torn me down emotionally, been domineering, gotten me to do dangerous things. The worst he'd done was keep me supplied in doughnuts, Mexican food, and pot, which I would have indulged in on my own. It wasn't that Cleopatra had anything against the weed. No one, whether angel or frenemy, should be an arbiter of other people's sex lives. If what happens is between consenting adults, it is no one's business. If Cleopatra and her man were having problems, I would listen, but I would not think that it was my call, that I should get to decide what happened in her love life. whereas Cleopatra would often try to create problems when I hadn't told her there were any. She'd ask how Asclepius and I were. I'd say fine, and she'd start criticizing him. I began wondering if I could count on my own perceptions, if she saw things I didn't. She'd spin details I'd shared with her into a sinister web, make me feel panicky, as if he were for sure going to kill me. She was being a troll. When I saw it finally, had it come into focus, as I realized that she'd actually blocked me just for trying to talk to her about my feelings, I was shocked that I hadn't admitted it to myself sooner. She wasn't a good friend. I was an amusement to her, entertainment, like one of her reality TV shows. With me, though, she could shake things up, stir the pot, and have some power over the plot. Maybe she did care. Things are rarely so black and white. But at some point things got out of balance. Cleopatra felt as if it were reasonable to ignore and then reject me because I didn't listen to what she wanted me to do regarding a man she'd never met. When I didn't yet know him very well, it seemed sounder to heed the instincts of my friend, who fancied herself an intuitive and seemed to believe that she had almost psychic powers, and whom I'd known since college. Her opinion mattered to me, perhaps more than it should have, and her words influenced my decision to send him away, perhaps more than I'd realized at the time. Cleopatra couldn't even hear my saying that she'd hurt me. After all the times I was there for her, all the energy and hours I put into our friendship, the first time I got fed up, expressed valid emotions, and let her know that I was frustrated, she vanished. She told me over and over again that Asclepius was going to hurt me, filled me up with dramatic fears about how he would drain me and leave me high and dry. But she did that. In the end, she might as well have been warning me about herself. I can try to see Cleopatra's side of things. She said that we were in different places, that it was important for her to conserve her energy for her family. But I thought that her messages read like a press release. It seemed like she was trying to cover up a bad motive with a good one. I hadn't tried to take her away from her family. I'd just been living my life. I didn't believe her. Then I saw her condescending public Facebook post about how she'd had to cut ties with me because I was showing signs of schizophrenia, and knew that she was an immoral person to do me like that, to discredit me, to invalidate my very credibility when I had been one of her biggest advocates. She called me paranoid and delusional, much like my father did. When people try to make me question my judgment and sense of reality, this is a major red flag. I don't think I'm infallible. My gut has been wrong before. Or, well, my gut is hardly ever wrong, but too often I have gone against it. I'd known Cleopatra was kind of full of shit since I was 21. My intuition has not given similar warning bell clangs about Asclepius being malevolent. There were times I felt afraid, worried he would destroy my life, wanted to run so I couldn't get hurt. But that had more to do with my baggage around men. He was guilty by association, not by his actions. Then my woman friend, my supposed soul sister, who had told me she would always be there, whom I had given the benefit of the doubt, was the one I should have been protecting myself against. What was she getting revenge on me for? I wondered. She had malice. I saw the bitch behind the curtain in the end. I don't like to call women bitches, but she gave me a chill, like that nun from my school did whenever I looked at her face. It was undeniable. Cleopatra liked cruelty. There was no need to block me. It showed how cold and uncaring she was, how little regard she had for me, that she would inflict the most devastating blow she could, give the biggest possible fuck you with my history. She knew all about Hades, aka Costa Rica, and how much his suddenly shutting me out, with no real explanation, had wounded me. I will not speak to Cleopatra again, at least not for a long time, and not without a serious explanation, an apology. And the trust has been so shattered that I would keep the emotional equivalent of a moat with alligators. But I will speak to my snake man every day. He never blocked me. Even when I exiled him from my kingdom, he did not exile me from his. She was not merciful enough to talk it out with me, or try to end on a loving note, after so many years. My mother liked Asclepius, until he took my side in the war she waged while I was in Colorado. It is jarring to let go of both my mother and Cleopatra as confidants. But maybe it will be better this way. Did I ever feel that they were on my side, or did I feel that they were on their own? I do think Asclepius is on my side, and an honorable person, someone I can rely on. I've been so damn wrong about so many damn men that it can be hard to trust my judgment. But I love the fucking shit out of Asclepius. I just do. Cleopatra is gone. Was she ever good for me? Part of me feels like she was always pretty mean underneath. She was able to beat the men at their own games, and be strategic like a politician. She used to call herself my Miss Cleo, like the psychic on the old commercials. Maybe she really should have gone in the Hierophant chapter. It was during the writing of it that she backstabbed me. I am saddened, but also ready to release anything whatsoever that does not serve my highest good. For too long, even though I was older and perhaps wiser, Cleopatra wanted to teach me as if I were her mentee, as if she were my spiritual advisor. It might be telling that the real Miss Cleo was sued for fraud in her business practices. She stole millions, hundreds of millions of dollars from people. Cleopatra told me that she needed more friends who were moms. It is not my fault that I can't be a mom. I would rather focus on the common ground I have with people. One of the things I like about Asclepius is that he treats my animals like the babies I see them as. But if Cleopatra chooses to be the expelling angel of the Lord and shut me out of her garden, that is her prerogative. I refuse to cover myself up in shame, seeing that I am naked and trying to hide it. If anyone tells me anything in my personal life is forbidden fruit, I will question who the hell died and made them God. Cleopatra blocked me, knowing it would hurt me, after 15 years of friendship. It stings. But I just had to do the same thing with Julius Caesar. I get that we need to set our own boundaries and take care of ourselves. I never blocked Asclepius, but I had him leave, and he respected my wishes. Maybe Cleopatra and I will reconnect down the road. For now, I feel all right with how things stand. There is an absence, a void, where she used to be. I do not sit and message with her to start my day any more, but I sit with my lover instead. Things change. People come into your life. Some leave. some return, but I am looking for the ones who stay. That is the difference this time around. I had one foot out the door, or wanted him to have one foot out the door, just didn't want commitment. There was something to be said for the independence of my youth, my being in the moment, and letting lovers appear and disappear without trying to pin them down, not attempting to make fleeting, ephemeral encounters into lifelong bonds. But I am also a grown woman who was married twice, someone who did dream of a lasting, monogamous relationship, of growing old with someone. My desire now is to be open to the idea that we will choose each other and keep choosing each other, as seems to be the case. I maybe don't want to hold tight to the torch of solitary confinement. Maybe don't feel that is the hill I need to die alone on. This queen and her innamorato will have a simple, peaceful life. Asclepius shows his love in little ways that say a lot. He carries the heavy trash bags, groceries, and cat litter. He makes me a latte at just the right moment. He listens patiently when I'm frustrated about my mom, or Cleopatra, or whatever it might be, gives measured, level-headed feedback. He encourages me to hope for the best, is ever an optimist. He pays attention to my needs and emotional state. He has a way of taking my hand in the car and making me feel like he will look out for me, but like I still belong to myself. 2020 changed the fabric of my being, pushed me past a point of no return, made me cross a line internally. Once I was on the other side of that line, there could be no going back to my old self, a self who didn't love herself, who was too insecure and afraid to be direct and assertive, who would turn the other cheek ad nauseam. I don't know how to explain that this isn't toxic, isn't reverting to old habits, but is actually maybe the first time I've been true to myself where men are concerned. If I thought Asclepius were bad news, going to take me away from my center and disempower me, I wouldn't want him here. I want him here because he augments my life. He adds humor, amazing home-cooked Thai food, food for thought, beautiful shared explorations indoors and out, fidelity and balance. We're just starting out on this path as lovers, even though we knew each other before, because love has only recently entered the equation. There was not a suitable environment for love to take root in during our first go-round. The soil of my heart was too rocky, too dry to plant in. I looked at him and obsessed about who he could turn out to be, the creep who might be lurking beneath the surface, false ideas about his nature. As time went on and more reality sank in, the reality wasn't so bad. It was kind of great, actually. We're not the same person. Might be an unlikely pair, as he seems more athletic and I more cerebral. But our opposites do attract, and there is enough overlap that the ways we are different keep things interesting. He likes to watch sports sometimes. I'm not very into sports. But when we run around Penthesilea's front yard and throw a football, I realize games can be fun. Sports aren't bad. It isn't all so black and white. He shows me so many shades of gray in between the absolutes. He has a criminal record. I felt like a snob in hindsight for being as prejudiced as I was against him for that reason alone. He had no violent offenses, just drug charges, which I myself should have had if justice were blind. Because I'd never been to jail, I thought his past was cause for concern, as if he were in a separate category, as if people who'd done time were any less people. Asclepius has been through hell, been a victim of police brutality. Because of a minor, sorry, not a Freudian slip. Because of a minor probation violation, testing positive for pot, he was put away, placed in a cage, and at times had his life endangered. But it gave him compassion, empathy, an ability to feel for others. It also gave him an example of what he did not want to be, a force of bullying and oppression. At the age of 36, I choose as my consort an ex-convict named Snake Man, whom I brought home from the woods. Them's the facts. I don't expect everyone to understand or approve of my choices. For Cleopatra, it was too much. She had other ideas about what I should be doing. But you know what? Here's a secret I learned while trying to be a good little Catholic school teacher. No matter what you do, people will judge you, so you might as well do whatever the fuck you want, if they'll talk anyway. When it is just the two of us, when I rest my head on Asclepius's smooth chest, and fall asleep to the sound of my cats purring on every side of us, knowing that he loves me and them, and would do everything he could for us, I am at peace. I know what I want. And after all the lovers, marriages, sexual assaults, and misadventures I've had, I know that what I want is nigh impossible to find. When I hugged Asclepius this time around, as soon as I closed my eyes and breathed in his smell, I knew that here was the man I'd been longing for. The characteristics I'd sought were right in front of me. He would have my back. I wanted to have his. I was so glad that he was all right, that he hadn't fallen from a cliff or succumbed to hypothermia. I wanted to wrap him up in blankets and take the chill out of him. I wanted him to have enough to eat, to be safe, to be with me, where I could take in his blue eyes and try to memorize them. With him, I know my love is reciprocated. After we fell into my bed for hours, there was no question in my mind that he was my man. I felt that I'd made the right call by bringing him home. I never wanted to lose him again. Just as with sobriety and intoxicants, there is a whole spectrum between celibate and married. Shell-shocked and turned misanthrope by the carnage when all the horrors of my past caught up with me, I overcorrected in my steering of my ship, veered sharply to the right, and almost wound up crashing on a deserted island. Maybe I didn't need to be alone for the rest of my life, because the men on this planet suck. Not all of them do. I can still take charge of my life and have a lover, especially if the emphasis is on the love. Asclepius shows me more and more of what love is every day. He does not make me settle for lust and domination as others did. With him, he gives a shit for one thing. And he cares about more than just physical pleasure. He cares about my having what I need in every area of life, about my being okay. Last week we watched the movie Into the Wild, which we'd both already seen, but felt deserved another viewing. Christopher McCandless's words, "Happiness only real when shared," haunted me afterwards. how close I'd come to choosing a path somewhat like his, with less survivalist skills, but the same self-imposed solitude. I told Asclepius about my spell candles, how they'd burned the whole time we talked that night he messaged me. He teased me about how I'd summoned him. If I had, I was thankful that I had, and it seemed to fit with calling in whatever would serve my highest good. I could have been all right on my own, but did I truly want to be alone? Or, if I were more honest with myself, did I want a life shared with another person? He has given me time and space to write when I've asked for it. I've asked for it whenever I've needed it, and I've needed it quite a bit. He doesn't make me feel guilty for that. He fixes me delicious brunches while I sit with my notebook, and then I try to fit in walks in nature because I know that they're beneficial for both of us, and that he refills his tank of energy, of vitality, by walking in the woods. He's been teaching me the names of flowers. The other day, he showed me a picture of a bloom on his phone, and I asked what it was. He said it was a crocus. This shook me to the core, as it brought to mind the Dar Williams song I'd so strongly associated with him. And February was so long that it lasted into March, and found us walking a path alone together. You stopped and pointed, and you said, "That's a crocus." And I said, "What's a crocus?" And you said, "It's a flower." I tried to remember, but I said, "What's a flower?" You said, "I still love you." The song ends with the couple having split, though, and the line, "I have lost to February." It was so poignant that here was my sweetheart pointing out a crocus to me. We had not lost to February. We just needed a break. I'd been putting off facing my shadow self, and I did a lot of that while we were apart. There is the cliché of clichés. If you love something, let it go, with the conclusion being that if it comes back to you, it's yours, or you should love it forever, or it's meant to be. I'm trying very hard not to think in romantic tropes anymore. But we did let each other go, and then we each wanted the other one back. That, to me, says something. There was more love than discord in our bond, and we missed the peace and ease we could see was there in retrospect. There were too many trees blocking the view before. We had to get up higher, where we could see the wide open vista in front of us. I make no public vows, sign no papers, but in my innermost self, in the chambers of my heart, I am committed to him, to us, and feel that same level of investment from him. I didn't know what to make of his willingness to go all in when I was so jaded. I felt it had to be a trap. But Asclepius is not a hunter. He is a healer. I am astounded by the way he seems to have mended himself, with fresh air, altitude, and exercise. He has a positive influence on me, encourages me to believe in myself, respects my boundaries, makes me want to eat vegetables and play outside. I'm really fucking into Snake Man. He plays good music, makes good food, takes me to good nature spots, rolls good blunts, and gives good lovin'. He really does make an excellent sidekick. And he views it as what is his is mine, but he gives me space for things that are only mine. He's sitting next to me, just keeping me company and being dear. I can breathe freely. I needed to take some time for myself, but I did not need to spend all of time by myself. He has been kind to me. We both said a few harsh things in anger via text at the end, but we have talked it out and come to a place of forgiveness. I made him go, abruptly, coldly, and he could forgive me for that, for how little I thought of him, only myself. What happens when you're mistaken about someone being your enemy? When you assume the worst of them and they prove you wrong? Asclepius is here because he wants to be, and because I want him to be. And I must say, for a man to make me reconsider my hard-nosed stance on wanting to be single forever, he would have to be pretty remarkable. He is. I love the way he uses silly voices when he talks to my cats, how he feeds them little bits of whatever we're eating from his plate, like I do, calling it kitty chicken and kitty fish. When Asclepius was gone, I would remember our inside jokes, all the extra nicknames we'd given my cats, and the wordplay that would keep generating new variations. He also helped me generate new experiences. While he was away, I had silence, into which I could echo my own voice endlessly, but I missed hearing his voice bounce back. In the same way that God didn't want to be alone, human beings do seem primed for companionship. We didn't pick each other to survive the winter. We picked each other because we were kindred spirits and well suited to get along. I just didn't grasp that yet. Unlike others I thought were kindred spirits, with him it was mutual, at least once I came around. He didn't keep me on a string like Julius Caesar did, returning for more over and over like the real Caesar did with the Celts. I can say this. After everything I have been through, my bullshit detector is hopefully a bit more tuned up. If Asclepius does shove me from a mountain someday, I'll probably just be impressed at his long game. I'll have to shrug and say, "You got me." But if he hurts me, if I ever do need help, I will call the cops. I'm no longer afraid of being helpless, having no options if a man did me violence. But I do not fear him. He is a gentle person who doesn't want to hurt anyone. Neither of us likes conflict. But we have discussed that there may be difficult times, that we'll probably get on each other's nerves at some points, but that we'll work through things. I don't expect perfection from him. And so it was that in my 36th year, I broke ties with my mom, at least for all intents and purposes of sharing intimate information, and had my supposed best friend break ties with me, all because they did not want me to get back with my ex-boyfriend, who, yes, happens to be an ex-con, and yes, I call him Snake Man. This might sound like the part of the story where everything starts to go downhill for me. Maybe it will be, but I feel more at ease, freer to be myself, with my sweetheart who loves to take pictures of wildflowers and climb mountains. I'm not doing meth, or ruining my life, or whatever else Juno and Cleopatra might fabricate. I feel the best I ever have. I am learning Asclepius, as he is learning me, and we are trying to find where one ends and the other begins. Rilke said of love that it consists of bordering and greeting and protecting the solitude of the other. I am discovering how to avoid merging in love, how to carve out an interdependence instead of a codependence. I am still independent when it comes down to it, but as I wrote in the Empress chapter, I will only enter into alliances that are sound and seem necessary. Is it necessary, this alliance? Maybe not. Except I do think people need love, companionship. Is it sound? I hope so. Every decision we make has an associated risk. The first time, I wasn't willing to take any risks where men were involved. It wasn't until he was gone that I saw what I'd lost, or almost lost. This seems an acceptable risk to me. Often I have gotten little or no closure when relationships have ended. I have moved on because I had to. I was prepared to do the same with Asclepius. Just deal. But I do not take it lightly that even after my many fuck-ups, he would still think of me with enough fondness that he'd want to try again. The thought of a life without me was more grim than the few tough times we'd had. It is the same for me with him. I'd rather roll the dice and see if we could make it work than walk away and never know. That is just where I am. I cannot abide going back to being a submissive, people-pleasing doormat anymore. I also know Asclepius is not going to ask anything of the sort of me. Eve was made from Adam's rib. She was part of him. He was the reason she was alive. Her very existence depended on him. She was made to keep him company. My favorite thing about Snake Man is that I feel like an equal with him. Feeling like an equal is what I have been looking for my whole life. A way to be me, but also be loved. Asclepius is a good man. It almost shocks me. It took me this long to find a good man. Others have had positive traits, but their toxic ones far outweighed the assets I saw. Or we just weren't compatible. Or maybe the only common denominator was me, and all those failed relationships were my fault. But regardless, every other man I was with, it ended. I did not want to go back, not after all was said and done. But with him, I did. During sour grapes moments, I said I would not go back to Asclepius. But I was trying to cope with feeling like I had no choice but to accept that it was over. It was fall when Asclepius and I met. Everything was about to turn cold, to start dying, or hibernating, or just walking around shivering and deprived of warmth and sunlight for months. Now the world is coming back to life. I am excited for what is to come, for the parks we will walk in, the adventures we will have. I look forward to camping and traveling and getting my tiny home in order with his help. I could have done all these things on my own, would have. But why should I make myself do it alone? Just to prove that I can? There would be the satisfaction of knowing I was a badass. But I can still be a badass, standing next to another badass. And there would also be satisfaction in settling in to cuddle my love at night, in his offering to chop the firewood, in my getting him back for the favor some other way, maybe picking up his favorite dessert, in selecting our next show together, in losing track of the hours spent with lips locked. In the dark, horizontal, I am transported to another realm when our bodies take over. My parts respond to him in ways I have only rarely approached. Without being too graphic, I can get where I'd like to go just from connecting below the waist and letting him take me there while he kisses me. To be graphic, Asclepius is one of less than a handful of men who've been able to make me come from sex alone. It is no coincidence that I am loath to give him up. But it was not sex that had me bring him back, even if it is quality sex. There are times when I do not even think of getting off, when I just want to hold him and pet his hair. I like watching him sleep. I did not expect that I would become this smitten. I thought he was cute, I thought he was nice, but my ability to love was so blocked. I like the way he doesn't talk just to fill the silence, how we can be quiet together comfortably. We each play on our phones, talk when we have something to share, listen to music, enjoy the sounds of nature, and make so many jokes. We take in the world side by side. I am still steering my life, but it can be wonderful to have a navigator, a co-pilot, a buddy. It's safer to not go into the ocean or the woods alone. Life can feel like that too. It is safer to go alone if the alternative is someone who drags you down, someone detrimental to your well-being. But when you find a decent human who enhances your well-being, why not take a chance if they increase your joy and are not noxious to your spirit? I am in the driver's seat still. I have to be, because I drive a stick, and Asclepius doesn't know how. On the literal level, I steer the vehicle. But on a more symbolic level, I know that I can turn the wheel in the direction I would like to go, and he will not grab it and jerk it back. But that does not mean he is to be the passive one. If he doesn't want to go that way, we can talk, find a compromise where our input is valued. In the past, I took compromising to mean compromising myself away, because that was what was usually asked. With a man who respects me, who does not seek to make me a small circle swallowed up by his larger sphere of influence, I can choose what nurtures my spirit, while sailing a course that also allows for my beloved spirit to feel free. I had to unravel my misconceptions around love. First, love isn't about sex. It especially isn't about depraved, violent sex that turns a person into an object. Second, if it is abusive, whether physically or emotionally, it isn't love. Yes, I should break ties with people who hurt me. I still will. Third, to love at all is to be vulnerable, but it can be worth it. Not all love is false.